Thank you. Thank you so much, Brittany. All right. So, hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Tracy Wallace, and I'm going to be taking you through this webinar. As Brittany mentioned, I have done quite a number of these. And for most of the webinars that I do, I think, wow, this is not going to take nearly an hour, and then it does. So, I definitely feel like this webinar is not going to take nearly an hour, but realistically, it probably will. Tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working in the IT space for over 30 years. I've been training for over 25 years. And I've been working with Azure for really pretty much since it came out, when it was kind of a playground for .NET developers. And so, have been in the cloud pretty early. In fact, I actually worked with AWS before it was AWS, and they had some pretty cool APIs. Anyway, so I've been doing this a while. I will tell you that, and I think this is important to know that, and there's a reason that I think this is important to know. I come more from the application side, application development side, than I do from the networking side. I work with Cisco just geniuses, and we have these discussions, and I look at their diagrams that they build out, and I go, wow, that's complicated. And I bring that up not to denigrate myself, but because kind of the way I see it is, if I can set up networking and relatively complex networking in the cloud, I kind of feel like probably just about anybody should be able to do that. May not be able to do it right off the bat, but it's necessarily a significantly less complex than what you would have if you're doing all that on premises. On premises is still there, it's still always going to be there, but we're going to take a look at how we can do this in the cloud. Now, what are we going to talk about? First of all, we're going to talk about segmenting Azure networks, and really what I'm going to talk about is, what are the components of Azure networks, and then how do we kind of segment that out, and then how do we connect is really what it comes down to. And then I'm going to go through a demonstration, and we'll take a look at what the architecture is for the demonstration, and I'll tell you about how I put that architecture together, and it's actually done via a deployment template. So I'll make that deployment template available. I'll give a link to Brittany and have her put that in the link that she sends out to folks. You can also get in touch with me. Feel free to. Love hearing from folks, and particularly love getting people that follow me on Twitter, because then I feel more important that way. My Twitter is just Tracy Wallace INE is my Twitter handle. Please feel free to follow me. I will put up, in addition to trying to put up interesting things there, also that is where I will put up any updates to our INE cloud content. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's move into this. All right, so I want to start out with a big blank screen here, because nothing's better than that. All right, but no, we're going to talk about virtual networks. Now, in the architecture that is Azure, the virtual network is really your starting point for, well, any communication, as it would be on premises, right? Now, the difference is, of course, when I'm setting up a virtual network in Azure, what I'm not doing is I'm not configuring switches, and I'm not configuring physical routers, and I'm not running cables. Pretty much I'm saying, hey, I need a virtual network. All right, and there's a few things I will configure at the virtual network level. For example, what is the IP range or set of IP ranges that I can set up for the virtual network. I also have the option of configuring my own custom DNS, although there is a built-in DNS service that you would get by default. But that's what we have the virtual network. Now, within the virtual network, I really segment that out into subnets. Now, there's some simple rules with subnets. I can have multiple subnets within a single virtual network. The IP address ranges of the subnets must be non-overlapping, and all of the IP addresses within the subnet must be fully contained within the IP addresses of the virtual network, which makes sense. Now, typically within the virtual network, you're going to use kind of your standard private IP addressing. So your 10.0, your 172, your 192, excuse me, etc. Okay, so you have those and you use those. You can use others, but that's typically what you use. Within any given subnet, there's 5 IP addresses that you cannot use. So really, the first 4 and then the last ones are all reserved. But that's a basic idea. Okay, now if I'm going to have subnets, I of course am going to have virtual machines that are going to use those subnets. Now, the way that virtual machines are connected to subnets is through network interfaces. Those network interfaces may also have public IP addresses, so they may provide a public interface capability, but they don't have to, so they can be completely internal. Now, by default, when I have a virtual network, okay, even though I'm breaking it into subnets, the virtual machines within the subnets are still going to be able to communicate with each other. So in this case, I have 2 different virtual machines. They're on 2 different subnets. Communication is going to be perfectly fine between them. Okay? And so that's one thing. So, okay, why am I going to go ahead and have subnets? Of course, you do have the segmentation of internal traffic, but on a software-defined network, which is what this is, of course, that's a little bit different. Okay, but what you do have, in addition to just being able to really organize your virtual machines via subnets, is you do have a couple of things that you assign at the subnet. You can assign, you don't have to, but you can assign at the subnet level. One is route tables. So there are system routes that are built in. System routes, for example, they're going to let you go between subnets. And there's also system routes that take you out to the internet. Okay, but if you have your own routing requirements, you can set up your own route tables. Don't have to, but you can. And then there's also network security groups. These are just really simple sets of firewall rules, allowing or disallowing traffic based on tuples that involve the source IP address and port, the destination IP address and port, and also the protocol, whether you're going to allow that or not. Now, there's all sorts of variations there. Not going to go deep into that because that's not really the focus of this, right? But that's kind of when you start thinking about subnetting in a practical sense, and that's usually what I'm looking at subnetting for on the back end. How do I need to really implement routing that may be different between different subnets and different virtual machines, really? And also, how do I need to secure those? How do I want to apply my network security groups? And again, there's more to those, but that's kind of a fundamental concept. All right. Now, we're talking about segmentation, and to some extent, subnetting gives you some segmentation, but those machines can still communicate, right? So what if I want to have truly segmented, right? And so I've got that original virtual network, and I've got the virtual machines that are in that virtual network, and that's all cool. They've got whatever route tables they need, which you probably don't. Have the network security groups, which is always a good idea, and that's sitting in those subnets, and they're talking to each other, right? Well, I could have a whole other virtual network running, and by default, there is no communication between them, right? So by default, I could have that machine right here, this guy right here, and that machine cannot talk at all. There's no way that it can talk to this machine up here in this top subnet, right? Nothing to do with their IP address ranges. I mean, frankly, they could be the same IP address ranges because there's no communication, there's no worry about overlap. Okay? But what if I did want to connect them, right? And that was kind of that next concept on that introduction is, okay, so if I need to have virtual machines that are in Azure and don't talk to each other, then it's very simple. I put them on different virtual networks, okay? But what if I have some need for those virtual machines to communicate? Well, then I simply set up peering, okay? And that may seem a little anticlimactic, a little overly simple, but that's it. All right? If I have peering between virtual networks, those virtual networks can communicate. If I do not have peering between the virtual networks, those virtual networks cannot communicate. Now, they may have other things that they're using. For example, I have a lot of other network services, so things like application gateways and load balancers and firewalls as a service, and I also have quite a number of scores, if not hundreds, of virtual network appliances, or as Microsoft says, network virtual appliances, doesn't really matter. Okay, from a wide range of security vendors that can do things like set up VPN gateway if I don't want to use the inherent VPN gateway. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that I can add. There's a lot of ways that I can control that, you know, but if I go back and I think, okay, these are isolated, these are fully segmented, and now they're connected. I think that's pretty cool, pretty strong, right? I don't worry about things like VLANs. There's no concept of VLAN, right? Because, you know, I could say, okay, I've got these on different VLANs and I can number the VLANs and get all that straight. Or just say, okay, I've got these different virtual networks and they don't need to communicate, so they're not going to. Or I decide they do, and I add the period in, right? And then I can add all of these other services as well as needed, tons of them, but I don't think that those services are really critical to being able to, you know, segment and understand segmenting, and then also being able to connect up. Tremendous flexibility in how you implement this, and it really is very simple. And that's conceptually, that was really all I had to show you. And what I want to do is jump in and kind of show you the environment that I've set up for demonstration. Okay, now I've got an environment, and it's kind of a variation of what you might think of as kind of a classical multi-tier, really just two-tier application. All right, I've got an application tier and I've got a data tier. Now, the reality is this is not a database application. It's just set up for the purpose of communications. And what I have, okay, if we look at this, and I don't have my tablet, so my drawing is going to be somewhat suspect. So I've got an application tier, very simple web application. That application tier is going to attempt to communicate with the data tier. Right now, I've got two virtual networks on the East US. Okay, I've got an application network on the East US where I've got two of these application servers, and I've got a data network on the US East as well. It doesn't have to be, but I just set it up that way. Now, I've got two data servers running the same load, and in front of those I have a load balancer. Okay, and so what my applications want to do is my applications want to go through the load balancer and successfully get data from the back end. Okay, simple as that. Now, at the front end, I've got an application gateway with a public endpoint. And that is, frankly, how I'm going to access my two virtual machines here. Now, I decided to set up in a slightly different way. And by the way, I have this jump box, and the jump box isn't actually going to get used. I just threw that in there in case I actually needed to pop in and have direct access. There's other ways you can do it, but if there was anything where I was going to need to, during the demonstration, jump in and have access, I was going to do that via the jump box. Okay. Now, I also have a network setup in Japan West. Okay, and so this is literally just about halfway around the world for me. Okay? And I've got the same application set up, except this time, rather than breaking it into different networks based on the application and the data, I really just have two overlapping functionally overlapping networks. So I've got one full net one, and it's got the application that's going to talk directly to the data, right? And then I've also got another one that has communication, again, directly between the application and the data. And then I've got another application gateway that's going to provide a public endpoint for these two over here in Japan. Now, I did not set up, and if we have time and our people are interested, I can set up a traffic manager so I could actually have one endpoint that would direct folks to the right location. Okay. Now, because I wanted to go ahead and set up the application gateway, I went ahead and I defined a peering relationship between the two Japan virtual networks. So I've got those two are linked, and that's really just because the application gateway has to be associated with a virtual network, and I wanted it to be able to get both of those, so I had to set it up that way. All right. Now, you will also notice that each one of these has a network security group. All right, and the network security group on the apps and Jumpbox is the same network security group. That's going to allow traffic from the internet on port 80. It's also going to allow traffic from my machine, from my public IP address to the machines on port 22. So if I need to jump in and do some SSH. Now, there's other ways and frankly, better ways to do that. Whether it's setting up a VPN gateway or an ExpressRoute gateway, or even using the name just escaped me, but I will get it back. But the service that you can use through the portal to open up a connection to your virtual machines and manage them. But I just thought it'd be easy, just let me in there and do that. Okay, Bastion, that's a service that I almost forgot. So there's tons of other stuff I could do. I wanted to keep it relatively simple. So what I have here is I've got a scenario where I have 10 virtual machines that are deployed. Those 10 virtual machines are deployed across 4 virtual networks. Each virtual network has multiple subnets. All right, and they all have the same subnets, but not all the subnets are being used, and I'll explain why that is in just a moment. Now, here's the fun part, and I did this intentionally, and it was later in the evening yesterday. I wasn't 100% sure was the best approach. I started this yesterday. Okay? Prior to yesterday, this did not exist. I kind of had a notion of where I wanted to go, but to me, what an important takeaway is that stuff is really not that hard. And so now, granted, of course, I do have lots of experience, but I set all of this up in a day, including creating this goofy web application that's going to be the thing that shows you that there's connectivity between all of these different systems. And the only problem I really ran into is that it didn't let me when I tried to extend my increase my quota for virtual machines in Japan East. Wouldn't let me do that, so I had to go to Japan West. And in so doing, the application that I've got is slightly off because it says Japan East. So I apologize for that once we get to that part of the demonstration. Okay, but again, I think pretty cool that I was able to go literally from nothing, and I've got this entire system currently up and running. Okay, it is all, if you are an Azure person, you are probably familiar with the concept of deployment templates, and that's what I've used. As I said, I'm going to go through the deployment template, and then I will absolutely make that available. And well, actually, I'll ask Brittany to make that available. And so you can pick that up and run it if you want to test it out and play around with it yourself. Just so you know, the virtual machines themselves, they're all Ubuntu virtual machines. They're running Docker, and the web app is actually deployed as a Docker container, all of which, again, was fully automated. But that's not really the point. All right, so that is our demo, what it's going to look like. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so what I want to do is, yes, that was Hawaii, by the way. What I want to do is take a look at how I deployed this. Now, if you are not familiar with the Azure templates, don't stress too much. Okay, actually, don't stress at all. You're in a webinar. It's fine. But just so you know what's going on, all right, Azure, like every other cloud platform, and also kind of cross-cloud systems such as Terraform, have effectively a markup language where I can say, okay, I want to describe what I want, and then I'm going to submit that description, and Azure's going to deploy everything based on that. Okay, and so what I do is I set up a bunch of variables where mostly I just set up things like the names of the items that I want. I did set up the size of the virtual machines that I want. Okay, all right, and then I set up my resources, and hopefully everybody can see that okay. Okay, but I've got I've got some public IP addresses that I use for my jump box. Okay, and then that's the configuration of my public IP address for the jump box. Then I've got some public IP addresses that I use for my application gateways, so I can get in and connect. Okay, and you know, look, there's a couple of different options that I set here. Basic IP address is going to be dynamically assigned. That's fine. Okay, then I set up my network security groups. I've got essentially two flavors. I've got the one that I use on the apps, which has a couple of rules allowing port 80 in and allowing port 22 in. And then I've got the one that I have on my data, the backend data, that actually doesn't let anything in. Now, if you recall, and I use the same network security groups, regardless of whether I am, you know, have this separated or not, as far as into virtual networks, right? So if I bring this up real quick, you know, I've got my data over here on the east. I've got the data in a different virtual network in its own subnet, and it's got that network security group. But over here in Japan, I've got my data in the same virtual network as I have everything else, but it is in its own subnet, so I can apply a specific network security group. All right, and so that's kind of how that works. And then I define the virtual network. Okay, and again, pretty straightforward. Now, I'm just using a feature that says, okay, I'm going to define this one way and make 4 copies of it, and you know, just have different settings based on that. And I've got my network that I define. I've got the address prefix for the network. I've got the subnets, and each network has 4 subnets, although they're not all used: application data, application gateway, and the jump box. Okay, now, again, I could have been a little bit more specific and differentiated based on what the different networks needed, because you can always go in and add subnets after a network has been created. But frankly, that just made it easy. Okay, now, once I get down to there, okay, now it is 200 lines. That looks like a lot, but if you look, there's an awful lot of lines that are like 1 character here, right? So if we see all that, that's just 1 character. There's a lot of that. This is not 200 lines of meaningful things. And just so you know, there's all kinds of tools. If you're looking at this going, whoa, this is supposed to be easy, that's a lot of this JSON. I've never seen JSON before, or even if I have, I don't like seeing it. There's so many tools out there. I use Visual Studio Code, and everything here was based on a template that I just went in and tweaked after it was created. So I created natively, I don't think I created a single line of this code natively. Well, I did add the copies. That I did add. All right, and so then I've got my network interfaces that connect up to the subnets. No public IPs for my standards other than the jump box, okay? But there we go. Now, if I go through that, that's all of the networking defined, including the network interface cards that I'm using. Right, and below that, it's all just setting up the virtual machines, and that's not really critical. Okay? But I do have that all done, and if I was doing this and I really wanted it to be extremely reproducible, I'd actually break this out into different sub-templates and have a primary template that I would use to deploy sub-templates. But in this case, I just put them all together. Just makes it a little bit easier to manage, since, again, I didn't want to do all of this in a single day. All right, now let's take a look at what we have built. Okay, this is my absolute favorite tool in all of Azure, This is the topology documenter under Network Watcher. If you are familiar with Azure, you can go to Monitor, and then you go to Network Watcher, and then under there you can go to Topology. And I like this because I can pull up the full topology of everything that's in a single virtual network. All right, and so anyways, you can see I've got at the top here, we'll zoom in a little bit. At the top, I've got my virtual network, and then I've got my 4 subnets. And the app gateway does not have a network security group. The jump box does. It didn't when I made this because I kind of messed up there, but that's okay. I've got a data. The jump box has the same as the data, right? Now on the AppNet, jump box has the same as the app. So on the AppNet, I don't really have anything on data, even though it's got a NSG. But over here in the application subnet on AppNet, I've got 2 virtual machines connected by 2 NICs, and I have my network security group. Now, this link down here, that's a application gateway, so they are connected to an application gateway. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through that level of detail on all these. You'll see similar things. A little different organization in Japan because I put the application data for each one in the same virtual network. This one's a little different because it's got the jump box as well. And over here, they don't organize. I don't have any way of organizing this, unfortunately. But here's the data east, same kind of thing. Now the data east is associated with a load balancer, and you see the load balancer there. And that's really all of the functionality. Now, as I mentioned, I deployed this via, wow, this is going to be short. I deployed this via a template, but I also wanted to show you how easy it is to deploy a virtual network. So I am going to deploy a virtual network. I'm going to create a new resource group. Demo network. Give this a name. Demo net, because I am not the least bit creative. I'll put it in central US, that's fine. Okay, what IP address ranges do I want? 10.4.0.0. That's actually pretty cool. It says, okay, it looks at your other IP addresses within your subscription. Says, okay, here's the IP address that we want. And you can add multiple IP address spaces for your virtual network. You can also set it up to work with IPv6. And then I can add subnets. So right now I've got a default subnet. I'm going to add another subnet, and we'll call this the demo subnet. Because again, utter lack of creativity. And we'll put that in as 10.4.1.0/24. It doesn't always have to be 24. You can go down to 29. You can't go below that because the first 5, well, the first 4 and the last IP addresses are retained for internal use. So you are somewhat limited there. All right, and so there we go. I've got those. Awesome. And then security, don't want a bastion host, don't need DDoS, don't need a firewall, and review and create. And there we go. I have a brand new virtual network. And now let's say that I wanted to deploy a virtual machine. So let's say I wanted to deploy an Ubuntu server. So I wanted to deploy that to that same network. We'll call that connected. All that the same. Go. Set up some networking settings for it. Don't care about the disk. Now on networking, because I put it in the same region and the same resource group. It says, okay, you want to go ahead and tie into DemoNet? Sure. And then we'll go through here. Okay. Review and create. So again, I know I went through that really quickly, but if I go back, as far as hooking this up to the networking, that's it right there. Right? What's your virtual network? What's your subnet? If you need to create a new one on the fly, you can do that. What's your public IP address? And you can also say, I don't want a public IP address, or connect to an existing one. So just so many different options there, very easy to set up your networking. And now, with just going through those two sets, I've got my virtual machine and it's on a virtual network, right? Now that virtual network's not connected to anything, but it is there. All right, now let's actually take a look at the application. All right, so I've got the application running. Remember, this was created in a day as part of a broader thing, so please don't be too upset about the lack of any decent visual design. And Brittany, please don't tell our design folks what you're seeing here. All right, so I've got this. I'll just refresh this. Okay, now you may have noticed before it said Japan West App 2. That's because I'm going through an application gateway. And if I refresh that enough, it'll flip between the two. That is the name of the host that this application is running on. I am connected to this application through an application gateway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check connectivity. Now, when I hit check connectivity, again, that still says Japan East. My apologies, it's actually Japan West. All right, so it's going through and it could connect to itself locally. That local connection is really just okay, let's make sure this is working in general. Okay, it was able to connect to both of the Japan, well, Japan West really, but both of the backend data bases. Okay, now if I go over here to my East, so this is App 1 East US, and again, eventually I could, there you go, hey, right away, went to App 2, awesome. Okay. Now, if I hit connect on that, it's connected to the local, but it does not appear to be connecting to anything else. And in fact, it is not. And that is because it is not paired with anything. Okay, so I have this, it's running, but it's really effectively running in isolation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dashboard and I'm going to set up some peering. So I'm now going to connect. I've got it segmented. Now I'm going to connect. So I'm going to come down to my virtual network and I'm going to go to my AppNet East US. Okay. And in AppNet, I'm going to set up peerings. I'm going to go ahead and add a peering. Okay, so I'm going to add a peering that says app to data. And I'm going to go and peer with DataNet East US. Got to give a peering in both directions. I'm not actually using forwarded traffic. I'm going to explain that in just a moment. And that is setting up a peering with my, there we go, with the back end, right? So if we think about this diagram here, what I've really done is I've now set this connection. All right, so those guys are now peered. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a peering here. All right, so I'm going to add another peering. It's going to be US to Japan 1. Virtual network, I'm going to go full net Japan West. That's going to be Japan 1 to US. And again, I'm going to allow forwarded traffic, and I'm going to wait for that to finish. So I had these segmented. I'm now allowing them to connect. And that will not take long. Now, the gateway transit, by the way, while we're waiting, that we actually talk about in other webinars as well, of course, as in lots of INE content. There is content on all of this on our platform. Love to have you come over. There you go. There's the little bit of the cell there, but I won't do too much of that. Okay, so I now have all of my connections set up. So I'm going to go back over here to my East US. Let's refresh it. There's going to be app 1 or 2, doesn't matter. And let's check connectivity. All right, now if you notice with my connectivity here, and I'm now connected to East US data, so it pulls that data where it didn't before. My Japan East 1 is pulling that data, but it's not pulling Japan East 2, which is kind of interesting because, again, just pulling this up, right? If I look at this, and I think, okay, so I've got a connection now between my AppNet East US, I've got a peering there, and I've got a peering over here on Japan West, fullnet to Japan West. But I am not able to make the connection all the way across there. That is because peering is not transitive. Okay, and in fact, really what's not transitive is not that peering is not transitive. I actually could get from my AppNet East US right now over to fullnet 2. But in order to do that, I would have to actually deploy an appliance, a router appliance. So I could actually put a Windows server in there, or really there's wide variety. In fact, we do this in one of our course lessons. We'll take a look at actually setting up that kind of transitive environment with an actual router set up as an appliance in an intermediate network. Now, I mentioned the gateway transit. If I've got a virtual private network, a VPN or ExpressRoute gateway, then the hub will actually automatically set up transitive routing if I check that checkbox, which is very cool, right? And so what it does is it really promotes this concept of hub and spoke architectures. That's way outside the scope of what today is intended for, but I think it is important to understand that. All right, so that is really what I had to show on here. I do want to point out just a couple of things. Okay, we'll erase all ink on slide and then take that back out. All right, I did want to show you a couple things that are pretty neat. Now, I have not set up any routing, okay, but there is built-in routing, and again, I just think it's kind of cool. I'm not 100% thrilled with the way that you actually have to get to the to see the actual system routes. And you have to go to a network interface. So here's a network interface. Oh, that's data. I didn't want data. I wanted app. That's more interesting. Okay, so if I go to one of my network interfaces, I can go down here and I can see effective routes. I'll zoom in on this a little bit once it comes up. There we go. Let's take this out of the way and just zoom in just a little bit. All right. So if we look, these are all system defined. I didn't do any of this. All right. We start out, we've got our a default route. They're all defaults. It's active. All right. This is for 10.0.0.0/16. Okay? And that is virtual network. Okay. Then I've got a 10.1.0.0/16. That is the IP address range of my East US data network. So that's set up, and it's set up to route next hop is VNet peering. That's a built-in hop. It says, okay, this is peering. Okay. Then I've got this 0, right? So if nothing else applies, then it's just going out to the internet, right? So anything that doesn't have a rule is assumed to be internet. And then I've got these that are really shutting down. So by default, anything 10 is not going to route. Anything 164 is not going to route. 192, 168, not going to route. Yeah, I've got these 25s, not going to route. And then the last one, 10.2. 10.2 is actually that Japan West full one that I set up peering for, but it's a little bit different. It's VNet global peering, and because the data virtual network was in the same region as the app virtual network, and so it just has regular VNet peering. But I actually peered all the way over to Japan West from my AppNet, and that had VNet global peering. And so there's my peering. And if I take a look, let's go back to overview. Oh, whoa. Let's go back to a reasonable view here. There we go. All right. If I go back and if I look at my network interface, once I remember how to spell, okay, we'll go back here. I'm not sure why I flipped off of that one. Go to app 2. And I want to see not effective routes, but effective security rules. And so this is showing all of the traffic rules that are allowing traffic into and out of this particular NIC. Okay, and so I've got, this one's actually opened up for everything on SSH. Oh, that's interesting. I set that backwards. Still worked. That was supposed to be the source. That's my machine. So good thing I did not need to SSH into this because that would have been frustrating. All right, but those are the network security group rules that are applied based on that overall architecture. And I just want to bring something up again. I just think this is really pretty impressive. Okay, I'm going to go and check connectivity. Watch how quickly that came back. So that Japan East one, which again is really Japan West one, all right, that came back pretty quickly, definitely under 2 seconds, probably under a second. In fact, yeah, that came in under a second. Now, the other one takes 10 seconds because that was a timeout I set if you can't get to it. But I'm going from the East US over to Japan West, right? And I'm able to communicate through Azure really in well, I would say pretty good time there, right? So I am paying for this. You do pay for traffic that's going over peering, particularly global peering. Not a huge amount, but you know, I didn't have to set any of this up. I didn't touch a thing of hardware, right? This is all done up in the cloud, and that is something that I think is pretty cool. And that, and probably as I say this, I may be giving our intrepid digital marketing person, Brittany, a bit of a shock here. But really, in terms of content, that's what I had, and you know, that's kind of intentional, right? This is 45 minutes, and we looked from the beginning how you can set up an entire segmented, not just segmented, but global network application. If you have questions, please, plenty of time. We've got, you know, 15 minutes before we even hit that hour mark. I'd love to hear any questions you have on this. Also, just to you know, let you know, there is one question that is in the Q&A, and I will get to that in just a moment. But please don't hesitate to put any other questions up there. I hope that this was of some interest to you. Please do not hesitate also to reach out to me. Follow me on Twitter. Let's see here. Oh, there's the chat. Got the chat. Okay. I got a really good question in the chat from Frank. We'll get to that in just a moment. In the chat, so I happen to bring it up. I'm going to put in my Twitter handle there. Please do not hesitate. Reach out to me. Follow me on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you just look up Tracy Wallace. You can also, of course, whenever you want, if you need to send me an email, it's just twallace@ine.com. Both of those are in the chat. All right, so I've got 2 questions, as I can tell. The first one came in very early, and it seems more of a comment than a question, which is fine. It says, okay, it will be great if INE will do a webinar or provide training on SD-WAN, Meraki, Cisco, SD-WAN, VeloCloud, etc., with AWS Transit Gateway, with multi-region, multi-VPC connectivity, and Azure Virtual WAN, etc. I feel that's real practical as we are migrating to SD-WAN at the same time, connecting to public cloud, IaaS, so we like to know best practices. That would be fantastic. You know, and I do know, and actually Brittany may even know more about this. I am not on the Cisco side. I do know that we've just come out with some SD-WAN content. We do have some content that is covering, at least I know, the Azure Virtual WAN. We definitely have content that talks about that. I will say that might be an awful lot to try to cover in a webinar. Okay. All right. I've got, hey, by the way, I've got a couple questions that have come in on the webinar chat. And would be great if, it would be great if those could switch over to the Q&A. It's a little hard to follow back and forth, but I'll try. So I'm going to read the two that are in the chat right now, and then I'm going to assume anything else coming in is going to come in on the Q&A. There's a chat question. Is it possible to build MA Lab on PC at home with VMware? MA, I probably should know that. So not sure what that question is. Maybe Rafal, if you could refine that a little bit in the Q&A section, I might do a better job of answering that. Does coding, Python or any language, is a requirement to build networking environment in cloud? It is not. That's a question that came in from, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, Jagannath. It is definitely not. I would recommend, though, that you start looking into infrastructure as code technologies. And having said it's not necessary, I think learning Python, right now that's becoming the de facto language that's being applied for, particularly for, you know, what I think they call them now, network dev or dev network. I guess dev network is what they're calling it. To do that, I know, you know, for example, the file that I showed you was not code, that was JSON. It's just a descriptive markup language. It is declarative, not imperative, so differentiates it from code or script. And as such, you know, no, you don't need that. And by the way, I deployed it. I could have actually deployed that directly from the portal. I deployed it using the Azure CLI, or no, I guess I deployed that using Azure PowerShell. Same thing. So no, you don't strictly speaking need it. I would, however, strongly recommend taking a look at Python. And I swear I'm not trying to sell you too much, but if you take a look at what we've got on the INE portfolio, not only do we have some a good bit of Python, but we also have some looking at some automation, and it's fairly new content. And in fact, a good friend of mine and an absolutely fantastic instructor, Keith Bogert, just did, I believe last week, a webinar on automating networking using Python. Okay, now he was looking at it actually from the on-prem side, but if you can get that, it's same principles are going to apply, although easier in the Azure and generally in the cloud side. Okay, now let's go over here. So how do so I'm back to the Q&A again. If you have other questions, and I know I didn't answer one of them because I wasn't exactly sure what the question was. So if you could, Rafal, if you want to put that in the Q&A with a little more detail, and maybe because my mind is blanking right now, and on what MA is. All right, so how do network virtual appliances learn about routes within a VNet? Would these need to be statically configured on the NVAs or learned via BGP? So you're going to want to set up routes. The answer is kind of both. So what's pretty cool is when you put a a virtual machine in Azure, right? It's going to pick up the system routes and also the route table if you've got that set up. And that is going to, I assume, and this is actually something, by the way, that question came in from Matthew. I'm not going to give you the absolute full answer on this because this goes to the, hey, my cop out, I'm not a full network guy, but I am going to go and check right after, well, okay, after I eat lunch. But after I eat lunch, I want to check with our network guys to see if it is actually BGP that's pushing that up. What I do know from experience is that when you do put in the NBA, if you're using just standard, if using just standard routing, then you don't have to worry about it. All I've ever had to do with the NVAs is put in the routing that I very specifically wanted. So that's a somewhat answer, but I'll get you a better answer and I'll get that email to you. Why not use Transit Gateway for peering? Okay, now a couple things. The term Transit Gateway that came in, that is actually an AWS term. Okay, and so that's kind of part of it. The reason why I didn't use that, and I could do that, I could do the equivalent of that in the Azure environment by setting up a gateway, a virtual gateway, and would be set up in Azure as a VPN gateway. The reason you want to do peering rather than setting up a gateway, there's a couple things. First of all, the gateway, you are paying for capacity, whether you use that capacity or not. So I'm always paying for capacity, and then the other thing is if I max out that capacity, then I'm going to have a bottleneck. Also, so with the peering, you're paying for consumption. In other words, you are paying for the traffic that's going across, but you're not limited. Okay, and in fact, if you are peering within the same region, then your performance is going to be the same as if they were on the same virtual network. Within Azure, at least, network performance is actually defined by your network interface. And so you can actually get different size VMs that have different capabilities as far as the network interfaces that they have associated with them. Okay, so the simple answer is I absolutely could have, but for a number of reasons, peering is a better solution. All right, so that is why I am not using Transit Gateway for peering. Then I've got under virtual net, oh, okay, so this came in two parts, it just got flipped on me. Can multiple virtual machines share the same subnet and connect directly? Absolutely, 100% yes. Okay, if I've got multiple virtual machines on the same subnet, they are connected, right? And in fact, there's a bit of an example of this. So over here, okay, these two can in fact connect directly. Okay, and really, if I look at it, okay, this application gateway actually has an endpoint. Well, no, it's in a different subnet, but they're all in the same virtual network. Okay, so again, by default, actually all of these here can by default communicate with each other. Okay, simple as that. And if they're in the same subnet, they absolutely can. All right. Let's see, we've got some other questions. So I think I also saw, did I lose that one? Ah, okay. We have the second, the idea of an INE webinar with Cisco SD-WAN connecting to a multi-cloud environment. By the way, we actually did that, not with SD-WAN though. We did do the multi-cloud environment last month, setting up a solution with on-premises and Azure and AWS. We did not use the SD-WAN though. All right, this one's pretty cool here from Paulo. On a virtual network, can you block the same subnets from communicating with each other? Sure. I can set up NSG rules, okay, and in fact, you can take a quick look at that. So if I really wanted to break something here, let's go to I'm gonna find my fullnet Japan West data. This is my network security group. Okay, so right now, this is one of my network security groups. This allows inbound traffic from the virtual network, which also, by the way, includes peered networks. Okay, but I could go here and add an inbound security rule, and I could say, okay, we're going to block, and we're going to say IP addresses, and this should be 10.2.0.0.10.2.0/24. Anything coming from 10.2. Okay, source port, destination port. We're going to block all traffic on any protocol. We're going to deny it, and we'll call this shut tight. All right, so what I've just done is I have blocked inbound communication from one subnet. So if I look at this, this is set in the 10.2.1.0 subnet, and I just block traffic from the 10.2.0.0 subnet, which is actually where the application is. And so now the only thing is, here's where I want to go. It may take a moment or two, and I have to get back over to Japan East. And now it doesn't want to go to Japan East, so we may have to block Japan West too. But theoretically, if I could get this, now that should work okay. All right, there we go. It finally did get back. I didn't see it. Oh, Japan West App 1. That is actually exactly what I wanted. I forgot. Japan West App 1. This is precisely what I wanted. So App 1 can now not get to Japan East 1. Now, I remember what I'm actually trying to look at. If I can get it to go to App 2, that should be able to connect. Well, even if I can't, this is the East US. And the East US can still connect to Japan East. So in that case, I've blocked a subnet that is part of the same virtual network that data's in. But I blocked that subnet so it can't get to it, but another subnet in another virtual network that I have peered and I don't have blocked through a network security group rule is able to connect. So the simple answer to that is yes, and thank you for giving me an excuse to bring this out to its full hour. All right, are there any other questions? If you have any other questions, if you want to put them up on the Q&A. So I think I've answered everything again. The network route knowledge one, I will definitely get the better answer to you. But if I don't see anything else up on the Q&A, we will call it a day. I do want to thank you all very much for coming to my webinar. You know, you never want to have a webinar where no one shows up. I'll also tell you, I think the SD-WAN example, that's a mighty big webinar to try and have. I'm not sure that one's going to happen, but please do not hesitate. If you've got an idea, particularly an Azure-related idea or cloud-related idea that you'd like to see a webinar, you know, pop over to Twitter. You know, send me a direct message on Twitter. Send me a message to my email. Both of those are in the chat. Okay. I now, with some Before we go too far, Microsoft Azure. So there was a question. I will go back to that one. Is it possible to build Microsoft Azure Lab on a PC at home with VMware? The simple answer is no. Both VMware and Azure are virtualization environments. So, while you can build something that is going to be very analogous to what you would do in Azure, the options that you have and the way that you build it are going to be a bit different. Now, what I will say is if that's something that interests you, take a look at the cross-platform infrastructure as code systems. The one that I'm very familiar with, is Terraform. And the idea being there that you build processes that are mostly cross-platform. I'll tell you, they're not. You can't just take one and make it exactly as is across platform, but it's pretty close. All right. So the answer to that, hate giving no as an answer, but that's what we have. All right. I do see one other question. Sorry, in the chat, John Swartz has done a great job explaining that will there be a more hands-on Cisco SD-WAN training video that goes into the configuration steps? And the simple answer is that we will forward that. I am not sure. I know the people to ask within the company, but I'm not sure where we are with that. And with that, Brittany, do you want to take back over and close us out? Again, thank you all so much for being here. I hope you got something out of this.